Thanks, Paula. Thanks, Nani, for having us here today. Just a quick check in the room. Who is from a media perspective here in the room today? And who's from a sort of a STEM and non-media perspective? Okay, tech. Okay, great. So today I thought I would just share some of the lessons of being in this disrupted industry for the last 17 years and share some of these lessons, some painful ones along the way that we've learned, so that hopefully maybe we can inspire others or maybe save others from getting some of the scars. So just a little bit of context before we jump into it. So 2009 was when we started. I was introduced to Daily Maverick a few months before it started by the founder, Branko Brikic. Maverick Magazine was the precursor to the Daily Maverick project, which was the digital reincarnation of that. And so we had coffee at, I think it was Seattle Coffee Shop in Hyde Park. And he showed me his prototype, and he did his pitch, and they were looking for someone with a bit of business experience to join the editors who were part of the founding team and part of the crew from Maverick Magazine. And I think I got the job because I was one of the few people in the world who could understand his thick Serbian accent, because my dad has a thick Greek accent. And so I was like, well, this sounds less shit than my other options. And let's see where it goes. And so we shook hands and helped raise some money. And in October 2009, we launched. And there was a small, we had access to a small boardroom in one of those early co-working spaces, not as cool as this, like there was no fake grass on the wall. And it was it had this air conditioning unit which was louder than most airplanes. And so it was in that place. And I started in a part-time capacity, and there were 5 of us. Who kicked things off. And so that was the origin story. But something else also started in 2009. Someone else got a new job in 2009. And so Jay-Z became president of the country. And so these two things sort of were set on a path, a collision course that we're going to later on collide, and big sparks were going to happen. But in actual fact, the story starts a little bit earlier than that, because in 2007, for probably the first and last time, Polokwane made the top of the Google search trend results, because the ANC elective conference was in Polokwane that year, and that's where Jacob Zuma defeated Thabo Mbeki for the presidency, right? And Zuma didn't want to be president of the country. He needed to be president of the country because of the outstanding corruption charges that were in play. And lo and behold, straight after he became president, the dismantling of the state security services and all the charges were soon dropped. And so there was a necessity around it. And so we know what happened after that. So jumping into the lessons, what have we learned along the way? What are the things that we experienced? And I'm going to share a few of the stories to try and illustrate some of those lessons for us today. So the first one is that we got by primarily on being a mission-driven organization. It was clear that there was this public service that we needed to fulfill. We didn't know how the hell we were going to sustain it. Probably for close to the first decade, it was really, we got by that we were so passionate about our mission that we managed to attract supporters and a way to kind of get by, and then things started turning around later. But we got quite far on just, I guess, mission alone. And what I wanted to share here is that often I've done so many amazing looking business plans over the years. They just look incredible. They move up and to the right in a linear fashion. And so our expectations are always that any new project, any plan, any business we start is going to look like this, right? But in reality, we're lucky if it looks like this, right? And so acknowledging it, knowing that it's going to be like that, knowing that the hard times are going to come, not planning for just scenario A, which is amazing and shoots the lights out, but is what happens when the tough things happen, when the bad things happen, when the disasters happen, when none of our assumptions are true, when a big fraud happens internally, or someone lets us down, right? And so I think being able to respond, expecting some of those things, and those what-if scenarios. And I think that was, along with having a really strong mission at the core, was being able to deal with those moments, and having a co-founder as well, to be able to pick you up when you're down, and vice versa, and having multiple different views and skills to bring to the challenge. The second one is values, right? And knowing the values that you have and living those values. And I think two stories jump out for me when I think about values, when I think back about values. And Marikana for us was a watershed moment. It changed everything. It clarified exactly. It was about 3 years into our journey when it happened, and it clarified the role that we needed to play in the media landscape in South Africa, which was now starting to feel the disruption that was coming from mobile phones, from social media, and also how the economic and political pressures were starting to really disrupt the business models of journalism. And so we were mostly based in Joburg at the time, and so when Marikana happened, we were able to send almost our entire team, which was, I think our newsroom was maybe 10 people at the time in an editorial capacity. And so I'd say there were like 6 or 7 people were heading out to Marikana, speaking to people, interviewing not only the spokespeople of the police or the mining companies, but also speaking to people on the ground and figuring out. And after 2 weeks, we published this investigation. Greg Marinovich was the lead investigator there, and it proved that the miners were not shot in self-defense, right? And that the people who were shot running away, people who were shot hiding from police. And we were sort of ridiculed when we came out with this, because the information that was coming out through press releases, the information that was coming out through SAPA, and which was then being picked up and broadcast out through other places, was really influencing the narrative there. And as a young organization that wasn't really known for its investigations, people didn't trust that we did a good enough job, and so. But we were proven right in the end, but the initial reaction was like, well, can we really trust them? And it showed us how the reliance on broken systems and how information was flowing from the people who had access to those channels was influencing the narrative. And so that showed us the role that we then had to play going forward, and it became clear, and where before we were trying so many things and not really quite sure. The next one, which where values play a really big part in how things turned out, was the Gupta leaks. And so the story begins when one of the lieutenants in the Gupta empire dropped off his hard drive and needed to be recovered at a hardware recovery store, and after 30 days hadn't collected this hard drive. And so, and after multiple attempts to get that person to come and pick it up, I think after 90 days, the ownership of that hard drive then transfers to the recovery shop, right? And so it was only after the 90 days happened, and then they looked at what the contents were on the drive, and then they saw, I think Jay-Z was in Parliament, and he was saying one thing which was a fabrication and a lie compared to the documents that they had here. And so they knew what they were sitting on was potentially massively explosive stuff, potentially going to, could cause a lot of damage, but they really didn't know what to do with it and whether they should do anything with it. And it was only after that incident where they were watching a parliamentary address and they had the information there and they could see the lies, and they were like eventually moved to try and do something, but they didn't know what to do and who to approach and how to do it. And so they burnt a sample of documents onto a disk. They made sure to not leave any fingerprints on the disk, and to try and make sure that they couldn't be traced. But then once they did that, the question was, well, who do we give it to and how do we get it to them, right? And so, and how do they protect their safety, like themselves, from what could come, because this was massively explosive stuff. And so they started what became, I think, the first of 4 attempts to get this information out to people who could do something with that, right? And so the first attempt was if I recall correctly, was trying to get it to one of the editors at the Sunday Times via an intermediary. And so that intermediary set up a meeting with one of the editors in the group, and that meeting went well, but it didn't bring up the sample, and I believe that they ended up just getting very drunk and completely forgot to speak about the sample. So that was attempt number 1. Attempt number 2, after that failed, was then to try and go to the Mail and Guardian in Johannesburg. One of the whistleblowers who had the documents parked a couple of blocks around the corner from the office, walked up, knocked on the door, rang the doorbell, and there was no answer because it was a Saturday, right? And so attempt number 2 failed. Attempt number 3 was to contact one of the DA councillors in Joburg. They set up a meeting, and it was a no-show. And so they were kind of like exasperated by the end, and they didn't know who to turn to. And then eventually, Brian Curran was someone they got in touch with. Brian got in touch with Mark Hayward. Mark Hayward, I'm sure a lot of you know who Mark is, sort of a massive activist in the civil society world, and was writing columns for us at the time. And so Mark summoned Branko, our founder, to Joburg and said, listen, I've got something you need to see and you need to come up. I can't tell you what it is, but come up, have a look, and see if you think this is real and whether we can do something with it. So Branko flew up to Joburg. He had the meeting. He saw the sample, and he sent me this message. He just sent me this message. He said, we have a game changer. And then he called me and he said, listen, we've got something really big. I said, that's great, that's amazing, but the single physical server that we have running the site is about to fall over and die. So when you get back to Cape Town, come and talk to me and we can sort that out. But I've got a big emergency right now. So this was like how we were operating at the time, really on a shoestring, sort of like, in the top room of a building in St. George's Street. So so this was our world. And so what happened, what kicked off after that was the materials that we saw were legitimate. We recognized it was almost impossible to fabricate more than 300,000 documents of emails and actual hard drive documents as well. And so we knew it was legitimate within a few tests of the document. And so the plan started. We had to get into planning mode before we could even do the investigations. Was okay, how do we actually tackle an investigation of this size, of this potential impact, and keeping in mind that there are whistleblowers who need to be taken care of and made safe. The people who work on the stories also need to be made safe, and we don't actually even have all the resources that we need to do the stories. So we reached out to our friends at Bongani, who'd done a lot of work on the Guptas, a lot of investigations. And so the planning stage was essentially Branko and Stefan Brimmer sending coded messages to each other to meet at Deer Park, leave their phones in the car and go for planning walks to try and figure out how exactly are we going to do this, how are we going to raise the money to do this, where are we going to do the investigation from, who's going to work on it, and what happens to the whistleblowers who now have a life that they have to give up. Because we had to assume, we had to sort of think in our minds, what would they be willing to do if they knew we had this information but hadn't yet published? And so the answer to that question was anything, right? That was the assumption that we had to work on, that they would be willing to do anything to either the whistleblowers or us before this stuff got out there. And so we planned to do the investigation from Ireland, because at the time Ireland was one of the places you could get to without a visa. That's no longer the case. But the idea was for all the investigators to congregate via different channels to get into Ireland, do the investigation from there, and then publish from there until we felt it was safe to do so. And then one night when I was still on Twitter, I looked at this headline and I saw the Sunday Times posting the billboard for the next day on Twitter, and I saw this headline and I thought, fuck, that looks exactly like one of the sample documents that we've seen. Now, we were going, what the hell is going on? Are the whistleblowers double dipping? Are they? And we were raising funding to get them out of the country on the basis of that, like, we had this information, we were the only ones who had it, and this was going on. And so there were a lot of frantic calls, as like, are the whistleblowers double dipping? As like, who else has had access to the drive? And so eventually after, and we were now also worried about the whistleblowers because they weren't out of the country, right? The whole thing was we couldn't start the investigation until these people had been sorted out and made some, and were somewhere safe. It turns out that one of the people who were helping us to arrange funding had managed to get a copy of the drive without us knowing about it. Her plans and her hopes for the investigation was different from ours. Her timeline was different from ours. She wanted to release the stuff ahead of an NEC meeting, which had in the past proven to be completely fruitless in terms of holding Jacob Zuma accountable. And we were working towards the elective conference at the end of the year. And so because of that, she decided to take a copy and give it to the Sunday Times and a couple of other publications before the whistleblowers were out and before any of us were able to start that work. So that person, if you recognize, is Magda Wecheka from Signia. She openly admits to doing that and put the entire project and all the whistleblowers at risk as well, because once they finished pulling out the toenails of the Gupta lieutenant whose hard drive it was and realized it wasn't him, the very next people you could easily figure out. How did that get there? All right. So then the scramble began. Right. Ireland was cancelled. We decided to, and we hadn't started investigating yet, so we had to bring all the investigators, the Mungani investigators, to our offices in St. George's Mall, and we had to sort of scramble and do catch-up work. We repaired the relationship with the prospective funders and just said, look, listen, we hadn't raised all the money yet to get the whistleblowers out of the country, but we managed to restore their faith in the project, and we began publishing a couple of days later with this editorial after the Sunday Times had done the first couple of pieces. And so that's how things kicked off. News 24 reached out to us and said, hey, listen, can we help? And we said, sure, come in. And so I think it ended up being about 15 people working on this. And over the course of the next 6 months, more than 70 exposés were published, which became the Gupta Leaks and ended up winning awards, but not more importantly, helped start a movement, right? And so there was a massive public response to what was going on. And we managed to get the whistleblowers out of the country not long after that, and they lived outside. Basically, had to give up their livelihoods, they had to give up their business, and had to live outside of the country for a couple of years before it was safe. In the meantime, there was not really much response from the Guptas or from the people in power. They didn't think it was going to make a difference to them and to their elective conference plans, and so we organized extra security at the office. There was talk of the prosecuting authorities and others were going to get in touch with us. We didn't get a single phone call, but we, with our limited budget, we could only get the 1956 karate champion of Cape Town, and so he looked a lot like that, I promise you. And stationed outside our door, we had to do practice drills of like, if we do get raided, which laptops get thrown out, which one's going to the safe, lawyers on speed dial, but it never happened. And so, but there was one incident, I think on day 3, of the investigation. So we were working in St. George's Mall late at night, and two of our Amabungani colleagues were leaving at about, I think it was 10 o'clock, and they walked outside, and someone jumped out of the shadows and grabbed one of the bags that had one of the hard drives in it as well. And you can imagine, like, we were on edge that like something was going to happen. And anyway, it just turned out to be a sort of garden variety Bergie attempt at a mugging. But yeah, that was sort of the I guess the mood and the feeling at the time. And so I guess one of the good things of the hard drive being leaked to other publications was that it did spread the risk of being targeted. So if you're the only ones, that meant it's concentrated. But yeah, the other parts of the media were also starting to train their sights on what was going on, and there was a little bit of heat was starting to be turned up onto all of the people implicated. The marches, I don't know if you guys remember, took part in the marches. There were public marches that were starting to happen around the country, and so there was a wave of public anger around what was happening and what was coming out and how blatant it was. We knew this stuff was happening, but now the proof was now starting to surface, and people were taking to the streets to march against what was happening. And all of that was going on while the incumbent, if you remember, Jacob Zuma couldn't run again for president. His nominated successor was his ex-wife, who ran probably the worst, most non-existent presidential campaign for the ANC on the basis that they were fully expecting that to win. Cupcake ran on an anti-corruption, oh my God, this is unbelievable what's been going on, and I've only read about it for the first time now in the media. And he ran on an anti-corruption ticket, right? And so they were fully expecting to win, but I'm pretty sure that those protests and those marches and the public backlash contributed to that less than 3% winning margin that Cupcake managed to get, like on the last day of voting, and managed to get it. And so eventually I think it was in February of 2018, Jacob Zuma resigned with a great Zapira cartoon to mark that, and so that was how he portrayed it. And then we know the Zondo Commission kicked off, and years of trying to document what went on. And so even though a lot of us can feel rightly aggrieved that there's not been enough action and consequence and accountability since then, there has been a few things that we can celebrate. And so some funds have been recovered, some organizations have been forced to pay contracts that have been returned, assets that have been recovered, and so it's north of sort of 11 billion rand has been recovered. There's another 10 billion rand that's been frozen, and so just from that work, there's been some recovery of assets, right? So when I think about values, when I think about the stories that really epitomize that and lack of values in some cases by some people, those two stories sort of stand out for us. The next lesson is what we like to call is thriving, right? And so for the first 10 years of our existence, we were living from payroll to payroll, right? And that is exhausting. It is difficult. And a lot of you who have been in startups and have been in media know this pain, the fear of the number 25 is payday, right? Like it's like 25 is just like, yeah. Anyway, so you get to the one, then you get to the next one, and then how are you going to do that? And so it can sap your motivation. It can sap your hope for trying new things, for innovating, and so you just get into the survival mode. But we made sure that we were never short of trying new things, never short of experimenting things. Like it was okay to try things and fail as long as we were testing. And I guess maybe we were lucky we didn't have like legacy revenues to protect, right? We didn't have the innovator's dilemma hanging over our head. We were just starting from nothing, and so we were forced to keep keep innovating. But I think that's important, is that you can't just be stuck in a survival mode, right? And whether you're an organization now that is 17 years running or just starting out, is that like you have to always, innovation has to be part of the culture. It has to be part of the expectations of what we did. And I think we've done that. And so we've tried a few things over the years. In 2011, we launched the second iPad-only publication in the world. We were publishing a 150-page a day digital magazine. Because at the time, I don't know if you guys remember, but tablet publishing, iPad publishing was going to save journalism, right? It was going to save media, right? And so the first publication was The Daily, which was a Murdoch publication. In the US, they put $20 million behind it, and they shut it down after a year. It didn't work. We carried on, and also it took us about a year to realize that this wasn't going to save us. But we tried, right? And so from that, we changed the way we work, the amount of work that we could put out in a day. It almost killed some of us, but it was, it was trying. Other things that we tried, we launched a newspaper in the middle of lockdown. As you do, launching a sort of a legacy product in a dying sector in the middle of lockdown. I mean, it makes complete sense, right? Anyway, it's the only growing sort of weekly newspaper. It is now 4 times the size of the circulation of the Mail and Guardian, and it is, it's 6 years on, and it's breaking even, so which is a minor miracle in itself. But I think an important part of what we offer our readers, and I look forward to getting this every Friday now. The other thing is our membership program. We launched a voluntary membership program. It was the first one of its kind in Africa, where paying and supporting news publications online just wasn't heard of. This was in 2018, and so this membership program became one of the most recognized and studied and case studied membership programs around the world, and how we've done it and how we've managed to get the success to do it, and at the same time keeping our journalism available to anyone in South Africa, regardless of your ability to pay, and doing it on a voluntary basis. And so that's how we built that, and so experimented with that. We've also produced a music video about climate change. You can go out and check it out. It's 2020's Eve of Destruction. It's a remix of a 1960s anti-Vietnam War song. We did it with a local artist, and it has more than 1 million views on YouTube. And so it was part of our sort of climate change journalism done in a different way. It's quite a dramatic video. I encourage you to go and check it out. But it was one of our experimentations. Probably cost a lot more money than it should have in time. But it was an interesting and good project, and a great version of the song. We also produced a documentary. This was about the Bell Pottinger story inside of the whole Gupta leaks. And so having access to that part of the story, getting access to Tim Bell before he died. And so this was a documentary and made it to the Sundance Film Festival in 2020, which was another cool experiment, and we've continued to sort of work on documentaries in the background as well. Lesson 4 is continuing to invest in people and the professional development of people. I realized in 2020 that as we had grown up from being a startup to being a medium-sized organization, that what got us here was not going to get us to the next phase. They say that when you get to like 30, 40 people, you need the middle managers you can't afford. And so you have to change the way that you work as well, right? With founders, you've got your hands in everywhere. You're with people all the time. You can influence decisions and guide and mentor, and then you start like being more distributed all over the place. You've got junior people coming in, teams working there. And so like I was like, geez, I need to go back and really give myself the opportunity to think about how it is we do that. And so CUNY, City University of New York, launched an executive program for media leaders. It was the first of its kind anywhere in the world that was recognizing that media leaders who don't work in the newsroom, who run these businesses, who need some kind of strategy, leadership, innovation type training, And so the program was founded with a sort of an MBA type thinking, but customized for the media industry. And so I went to New York to participate in this after the Sundance Festival started. The program, and then COVID hit. So for the rest of our program, it was done online. But that was sort of an opportunity for us for me to go back, really think about how we wanted to transform the organization, how we wanted to become more strategic, and then also to meet other leaders from other organizations around the world. And so at the end of that, I wrote this 60-page document, which was a strategic transformation document, which was called Data-Driven Audience Centricity. So those in the STEM world will probably go, geez, okay, that's very cool. But those of you in the media world going, there's no chance in hell that anyone is going to buy into a document called Data-Driven Audience Centricity. And so I was advised, great advice, to change the title to Securing Our Future, because everyone can buy into securing a future in a disrupted media industry. And so that became the strategic blueprint for from 2020 onwards, and we saw some incredible growth from that. But the lesson here is about recognizing the need to invest in people, and if we were going to change the organization and improve the organization, I had to change and improve myself first. And so that was part of it. And then recognizing we also had to do a lot of leadership development work as well. And so a leadership development program was designed to bring the next batch of leaders through. We did Enneagram profiles. The whole team did Enneagram profiles, and we saw that our founder, Branko, got an Enneagram 7. Any of you who've done this before, that's the very cool named enthusiastic visionary. I have the more drab loyal skeptic. I mean, what a shit. Like, honestly, that's such a crap name for an Enneagram profile. And so you're a 7 too, right? Yeah. So it was quite interesting to do this stuff and to be taken through that, to realize as a team, like, we were actually quite well scattered as a team, our leadership team, but also knowing that, okay, this is how my brain works, this is how his brain works, this is why, they use the words they do, this is why they, and so recognizing that in yourself and others also made for really interesting discussions. And so Branko is very much about like getting people to the top of the hill, motivating them, charging up the hill. And I'm good at like, well, what happens if someone falls down the hill? What's the next hill we get to? What do we do when we get to the top of the hill? It's like, so it actually in the startup world, they talk about having co-founders and investing in co-founders, but actually you don't want everyone in a 7, right? Because otherwise, that stuff in the background, the pipes don't get built, or you can't have everyone there. And so it's nice to have complementary. And actually, the more I think about it, like a 6 or 7 are probably really good complementary profiles to have for co-founders, or it was in our case. Just carrying on with this theme of investing in people, there's a sort of a mantra in the business world that culture eats strategy for breakfast. But I honestly believe culture is strategy, right? It is something that you invest in. It's something that you need to be conscious about. You don't just let it happen. And if you do that, you will get discretionary effort from people, right? And so often a lot of people that we've worked with in the past come out of traumatic workspaces, toxic environments, and so often there's a rehabilitation effort that needs to be made, but also treating people like adults, giving them the opportunity and the freedom to make choices, and some people respond well to the sort of the loose carte blanche opportunity drawing boards that we provide them. Others don't, but in all, like, sometimes we also have very difficult conversations. But on the whole, it's like let's make this a fun place, a nice place to work, to be creative, to do stuff in the world, and to not only work for ourselves but for each other. And then I guess lesson 5 is, as we all stand on the brink of the next big disruption, which is AI, right? Every organization, every industry is now going to be faced with, like, how do we, what is the next big change that we have to make? is that it's never done, right? The only prize you get for navigating change is more change, right? And so I think that's recognizing that that is going to be part of the path going forward and always, and sometimes they're going to need to be big changes and sometimes they're going to need to be small changes. And we're on the brink of another big one. And so some of the tools that we like to think about is this futures cone. I don't know if you've seen this before, but as humans, when we think about the future, we sort of get stuck in this, there we go. We sort of get stuck in this probable future cone, right? So we have a narrow sort of extension of what does the future look like when we're planning and building and thinking about the future, but it's sort of like very much in what we see and driven by what the past has happened. And so we end up getting sort of stuck in this very small sort of space of what the future could look like. And if you're in media and you were thinking about if you were in 1980s thinking about, well, what is 2010 going to look like in terms of publishing? Very few people, most people are going to think, like print is still going to rule the roost in terms, and it's going to be massively profitable, and it's really about then looking at, well, what is actually plausible and starting to extend that future cone wider, right? And making ourselves think in ways that are, okay, well, let's go crazy on this, right? Like, what if this happens? What if what if this completely new thing that we don't even think about comes out? And then what is possible? Let's go take mushrooms and like really think about like what is possible, like in this future scenario. And so, just working through an exercise like this of going through these probable, plausible, and possible scenarios gives us an opportunity to think about those really wild card scenarios, and not only reacting to them if they happen in 5 years' time, but like going, okay, well, now we're a little bit more prepared, but also actually that sounds like something we might want to experiment with, and also how we might then try an innovation which is completely blue sky and no one is thinking about, because often what happens, a lot of innovation happens, and in newsrooms they've done some studies on this, is that innovation is often what's called exploitative. And in that, what they mean is it's about how do we make this current process more efficient, right? And so newsrooms have a tendency to work on that versus explorative innovation, which is how do I come up with something that's completely new, right? That's never been done before, a new product, a new way of doing it. And so this tool helps us to sort of think about the future in those ways and come up with responses to that. Cool. Another thing as we contemplate the impact of AI, one example that's been thrown about by some authors in thinking about this is the impact of the shipping container. And it's quite strange, shipping container AI, like how the hell can, where's the relevance? And so the example that was used in this book, Reshuffle, that I've been reading, is as Singapore was going through its transformation, in 1960 it was one of the worst performing ports in the world. So as part of the Greater Singapore project, the port was a major part of that. And it was incredibly well positioned on the trade routes between the east and west, but it was still one of the worst performing ports. And I didn't know this, but shipping containers really only got standardized in the 1960s. And at that point, and that completely had a knock-on effect and massive impact on the global logistics business, because once the shipping containers were standardized, then that allowed things to move around a lot more easy, because the ports and the places that took advantage of that could now get a lot more cargo moved through that. And the quicker you can get cargo moved through a port, the more attractive it's going to be for shipping companies to use it and for exporters to dock there, right? And so they didn't just look at, so they took a bet on the standardization of shipping containers, but they didn't just build or buy more cranes and invest in or marketing. They built a deep water port that could that could accommodate ships that were going to take more and more of these containers. They redesigned their customs processes to be more efficient in being able to support a faster throughput of shipping containers. And then they integrated the ports into land cargo routes as well. So they looked at not just the tool of the shipping container standardization project, but looked at the entire system of like, what is it that we need to change in order to accommodate this change? And so that's what, and then the net result of that is that Singapore is now, was by 1990 the busiest port on earth. And I'm sure Cape Town and Durban can probably learn a couple of these lessons. But, and as we stand on the brink of this major AI disruption, we need to be thinking about not AI as a tool that can help us do our existing stuff faster or better, but what is the system change that we need to be thinking about that is going to help us leverage these things in new ways, and thinking about how we organize ourselves, the information that we have available, the institutional knowledge that then needs to be codified into ways that we can access, the way our teams work, the way we shift containers of information into a system and comes out in 10 different ways down the line. And so that's how we need to be thinking about this next major transformational shift in how we work. And then lesson number 6 is that there are clues from everywhere, especially in an industry that's been disrupted like ours. We need to look at those who are doing well within our industry and also learning from outside of the industry. So, for a big part of my transformation project, that the document that I did, the innovation report by the New York Times was a seminal document for our industry that recognized the way that we need to work has to shift. Like, this was a response to the digital transformation and the challenges there. People forget that in 2014, when this document came out, people were talking about how BuzzFeed and Huffington Post were going to be the death of the New York Times. Right? And so this was a recognition of the changes that were required. And so, we study those reports, we look at those, what can we bring? Obviously, massive 200-year-old organization, very different to us, but there are lessons there in terms of how we want to work, what we want to focus on, what goals we want to use, etc. Books about behavioral biases, how do we incorporate that into our marketing, some of the innovation successes at Amazon, some of the cultural practices you don't want to copy there. But yeah, there's lessons from all over, and so it's often outside of the industry, in books, and not just in media specific stuff. We need to expand our lens to find those lessons. And then giving back, I think it's important that as an organization that's managed to survive and in some cases excel in this very difficult environment that we operate in, it's also our responsibility to give back. So as an organization, we get involved in talks like these, or training sessions, or we're asked to put on masterclasses, and we share what we've learned in the hope that others can learn from that. Even what some people would consider direct competitors, we've even done like a membership masterclass with them sitting in the room. Like, we're like, well, look, it's fucking hard, but we'll share it, and the world, South Africa will be a better place if there are more successful, good quality publishers doing stuff out there. And so we're always sharing what we've learned along the way. I've been involved in designing this executive program in media leadership at Gibbs Business School, and so and this was sort of inspired by that CUNY course that I did, but that course cost $27,000 and 3 trips to New York. I was lucky enough to get a scholarship to help cover some of that tuition, but the idea was, well, what about, that's only accessible, I think in the entire time there have been 3 African publishers or people involved in media who've been able to attend that course. There's also the one in the University of Lancashire, but even that is difficult, right? So this was, our plan was to try and build something that you could, over the course of 4 months, in Johannesburg, do something. And so we designed this course where business school faculty and media specialists, online and in person, can do something. And so that's part of how we're giving back to the industry. And then the final lesson, I guess, in all of this is, and underpinning a lot of this is know what makes you special, how you create value in people's lives, and why you're needed, right? And so for us, that's understanding that journalism, in our interpretation, has two reasons for being. The first is to be a watchdog, and the second is to be a guide dog. Right? And so there's these dual roles that we believe the kind of journalism that we do needs to fulfill for society, right? And so help protect our democratic institutions, and the other one is to help people navigate life. How do they make choices and get through this thing called life, right? So that's what we feel our job is, and that underpins everything that we do. And so to do more of that. And then finally, I think, this one is just stay alive long enough to get lucky, right? Like, it's, and that is, like, for some people easier than others, but that certainly was we found that was true. We did get lucky, but it was also because we were around long enough to do that. So, yeah, I think that's it for me today.